The concept of intelligence is often shackled to a single metric, a cold, numerical value derived from a standardized IQ test that frankly ignores the vast spectrum of human cognitive processing and daily lived experience. As a practicing clinician and a doctoral candidate in psychology, I frequently encounter individuals who harbor deep seated doubts about their intellectual capabilities because they do not fit the archaic mold of the mathematical savant or the traditional academic powerhouse. Today, we are going to explore the scientific indicators of high intelligence, but we will not be relying on standard psychometric evaluations. In my doctoral program, we spend an exhaustive amount of time studying the nuances of psychometrics. It is a pillar of our training because the administration of these tools requires strict adherence to clinical standards that are often regulated by state boards and the American Psychological Association. However, I want to establish a crucial premise. We are not here to discuss the technical minutiae of a Wechsler or Woodcock Johnson assessment. First, a clinical diagnosis cannot be performed via a video. And second, intelligence is a much more fluid and multidimensional construct than any paper and pencil test can fully encapsulate. I have previously discussed neurodivergence and its intersection with standardized testing, and today we will apply that same investigative rigor to dismantle what the scientific literature actually reveals about high level cognitive functioning. Before we delve into our first clinical marker, I must pause for a brief personal reflection. You might notice that I seem a bit more tired today or that my focus feels slightly strained. Last night, while deep in the weeds of a research dissertation regarding the longitudinal effects of cognitive load, I experienced a sort of mental burnout that manifested as physical exhaustion. I spent hours staring at data sets until the numbers began to blur, and I realized that in my pursuit of understanding the mind, I had completely neglected the basic needs of my own nervous system. I felt frustrated and, ironically, quite unintelligent for failing to manage my own executive functions. This is the reality of clinical life. We are often masters of theory, but students of our own biological limits. I share this because it is vital to remember that intelligence is not a static shield against human fallibility or exhaustion. Our first legitimate indicator of superior intelligence, verified across numerous peer reviewed samples, is high openness to experience paired with the active construction of knowledge. This trait is derived from the five factor model of personality, which remains the gold standard in psychological research due to the massive volume of cross cultural data supporting it. Within this model, openness is subdivided into curiosity, intellectual engagement, and aesthetic imagination. Large scale population studies show that individuals who score highly in these categories also tend to exhibit superior performance in abstract reasoning and working memory tasks. What is particularly fascinating from a clinical perspective is that these individuals are not ideologically rigid. They possess a psychological flexibility that allows them to entertain opposing viewpoints without an immediate defensive or emotional reaction. Their brains seem neurologically primed for the understanding that there is always a deeper layer of complexity to be uncovered. Of course, we must always consider the variable of developmental trauma. Trauma can cause a person to close off from new experiences as a survival mechanism. So, this marker must be interpreted within the context of an individual's emotional safety and environmental stability. Moving to our second marker, let us examine the relationship between self regulation and long term life outcomes. This is a topic that shifts our focus from the laboratory to the theater of real life. There is a famous longitudinal study that tracked 1,000 individuals from birth into their mid 40s. The researchers found that childhood self control was a more accurate predictor of physical health, financial stability, and even criminal avoidance than traditional IQ scores or socioeconomic status. This suggests the existence of an operational intelligence that is deeply tethered to the prefrontal cortex and our executive function suite. This allows an individual to simulate future consequences and inhibit impulsive responses that would otherwise derail long term objectives. However, there is not always a perfect correlation between raw IQ and self regulation. We often see brilliant individuals whose emotional regulation is disorganized, particularly in the context of neurodivergence, where the cognitive architecture is exceptional, but the executive wiring presents significant challenges. This is why I insist on synthesizing multiple research streams. A singular data point is never sufficient to map the human psyche. I spend countless hours distilling these studies because I am genuinely concerned by the oversimplification of mental health on the internet. Scientific discourse requires the humility to acknowledge the limitations of our current models. Our third signal is intellectual humility, which is the cognitive capacity to recognize the boundaries of one's own knowledge. While it sounds like a simple personality trait, it is actually a complex metacognitive achievement. Data indicates that those who are comfortable admitting their ignorance perform better on complex reasoning tasks and are less susceptible to the confirmation biases that plague most human decision making. They are essentially more effective thinkers because they do not allow their ego to serve as a bottleneck for new information. The fourth signal is a high capacity working memory. In cognitive psychology, we utilize models that include the central executive, the phonological loop, and the visuospatial sketchpad. Decades of research demonstrate that the ability to hold and manipulate information in the short term mental workspace is one of the most reliable predictors of fluid intelligence. This is the mechanism that allows us to solve novel problems without the crutch of previous experience. I will include links to the specific academic journals in the description so you can examine the confidence intervals and effect sizes for yourselves. While raw statistics can be dense, it is incredible to see how mental storage capacity correlates so tightly with the speed of neural processing. Fifth, we must address verbal fluency and the G factor. In psychometric research, G stands for general intelligence, a latent variable that underlies all cognitive tasks. Verbal reasoning has been shown to not only predict academic success, but also occupational longevity and complex problem solving in social environments. The ability to articulate intricate concepts and navigate the subtleties of linguistics is a marker of a highly interconnected neural network. Again, we must control for trauma. Chronic stress can specifically impair the Broca's area and other language processing regions of the brain. So, a lack of verbal fluidity should not be mistakenly equated with a lack of intellectual potential. The sixth sign involves a preference for solitude and deep work environments. Research focusing on gifted populations often notes a tendency towards social withdrawal. However, it is imperative to distinguish between correlation and causation. As I emphasize to my students, correlation does not mean one thing causes the other. Consider the relationship between heat waves and drownings. They rise together, but the heat is the mediating factor. Regarding intelligence and solitude, high cognitive capacity may not inherently cause a desire for isolation, but it often results in a mismatch between the individual and their peer group, leading them to choose solitude for intellectual stimulation. Alternatively, highly intelligent brains may have a higher threshold for boredom, allowing them to remain engaged with internal mental processes for extended periods. Finally, we have cognitive flexibility, which is the capacity to switch between different concepts or to adapt one's strategy when the environment changes. This is the hallmark of an adaptive mind. Intelligent individuals process negative feedback as a constructive data point rather than a personal attack, allowing them to update their worldviews with remarkable speed. They are less likely to suffer from functional fixedness, which is the inability to see an object or a concept outside of its traditional use. This script has become a deep dive into the clinical reality of the mind, but the psychology of intelligence is a vast, ever evolving field that deserves this level of detailed exploration. I hope this professional perspective encourages you to see your own cognitive strengths through a more scientific and compassionate lens. All cited bibliography is available in the description below. If you value this clinical, evidence based approach to psychological topics, please consider engaging with the channel to support further scientific communication. I look forward to our next clinical breakdown.